ha llegado el momento también de escuchar cuáles son los avances en biotecnología alimentaria, porque esta es la mesa de innovación y sostenibilidad en la cadena de valor de los productos acuáticos, que seguro que nos va a tener a todos pegados porque nos van a estar hablando de algo que nos va a sonar a futuro, pero que es presente y que seguramente va a generar líneas muy importantes de comportamiento, de compra de los hogares y de consumo durante los próximos años. Así que voy a dar paso a los expertos internacionales que nos van a acompañar, moderados por Katarina Šipić, que es secretaria general de la AIPC, la Asociación Europea que representa a los procesadores y comerciantes de pescado. Adelante, Katarina, un aplauso para ella, por favor. Ella se va a encargar de conducir la mesa y todas aquellas preguntas que hagan llegar, porque hemos podido ya solucionar la pequeña incidencia que había por allí. Alguien me decía que no le había funcionado, vuélvelo a probar, porque ya está funcionando a la perfección la aplicación para lanzar sus preguntas y para responder a la pregunta que Katarina enseguida les va a formular. Pero antes vamos a seguir recordando las palabras, la textualidad de los artículos de ese código de conducta para la pesca responsable. Algunos habrán adivinado antes cuál era de los artículos el que hemos escuchado por voz de diferentes ciudadanos y otros habrán adivinado que no eran ciudadanos de Vigo, que eran del mundo entero. Venga, vamos a ver otro. Gracias. Hasta ahora.
States and relevant organisations should sponsor research in fish technology and quality assurance and support projects to improve post-harvest handling of fish, taking into account the economic, social, environmental and nutritional impact of such projects.
Sure. Hello everyone, good morning. First and foremost, let me just say thank you as usual to Conchema, to Eloy and Giovanna for the invitation. I have a question that is a bit easier than the last one, so you don't have to have studied the code of conduct for this one. So it says, are consumers ready to incorporate new aquatic products into their diet, such as seaweed, that maybe we actually already are eating, but also cultured proteins, and we're going to be speaking about those. So I need to give you around 60 seconds so that you can reply the question. And it immediately came to my mind that maybe I should ask Julio, what does Chile think about this question exactly?
Bueno, esto depende mucho de la idiosincrasia de cada uno de los países, evidentemente. Respecto de lo que consideramos nuevos alimentos, en el caso de las algas, por ejemplo, es un alimento que se ha consumido por siglos en Chile y hoy día desarrollar cultivo de algas parece ser una tendencia mundial. Las algas fueron durante mucho tiempo un consumo de los sectores populares en el borde costero. Entonces, ver que hoy día esto se proyecta como la posibilidad de un consumo que incluso tiene características gourmet es una sorpresa y una gran oportunidad de negocio también.
Fantastic. I went sort of in my head speaking about Chile because I was thinking maybe it is a little bit more traditional, definitely in terms of, I think, the speakers that I have at the table today. I was also thinking in my head traditional would be Jus Pastor, and then we'll come to those people that are a little bit AI, what you would say, maybe in our sector. Oopsie daisy, so 71% says yes. That wasn't exactly what I was expecting. 28% or 29% says no. Okay, so that's, I think, an excellent introduction. So we're ready for the future. I don't think it's a question, so you just simply have to be ready, I think. So let me introduce the gentleman and the lady that I have here. Sebastian Racas is the founder and CEO of Blue Seafood. That's a leading, and I believe a first European food biotechnological company, and you guys produce cultivated fish cells. Then I have Helena Abro. Helena is board member and former president of the Council of the International Seaweed Association and strategic advisor to the Global Seaweed Coalition. Senior seaweed specialist also at the Bantry Marine Research Station in Ireland. Mihir Pershad, founder and CEO of Umami Bioworks, a platform basically, and and Miguel will explain later, in marine cell culture based in Singapore. Julio Salas, the Undersecretary of Fisheries and Aquaculture of Chile, the highest authority this would be in Chile in the sector. It's the Undersecretariat responsible for regulating fishing and aquaculture activities in the country. And then Jus Pastor, President of the Board of Directors of IPSI, so the European Fish Processors and Traders Association, obviously an association connecting fish processing companies, importers and wholesalers across Europe. I would like to start, again, I would like to go back actually to Julio. So Julio, we were speaking a little bit before coming on board here. You are overseeing, Chile is the 10th biggest in terms of fishing, 10th biggest nation in terms of fishing. And you are also world's second largest salmon producer, therefore aquaculture. So this obviously puts you in a big position in terms of trying to balance particularly the challenges of sustainability. And obviously we're actually supposed to bring to the audience today innovations. So what is innovative? But I would like to ask you if you can basically first put Chile on the map, explain a little bit what the situation in this sector is today, and what are the innovations that Chile has already obviously been introducing, considering the challenges and the needs in terms of sustainability.
Bueno, hay que entender en primer lugar cuál es el punto de partida, el punto de base de Chile. Chile tiene linealmente alrededor de 4.500 kilómetros de costa. Solo para tener una referencia, equivale su largo de costa a venir desde Moscú hasta Vigo, y nos queda espacio para volver a Barcelona. Ese es el largo lineal de la costa de Chile, pero que además está constituida por una enorme cantidad de fiordos, lo que hace que sean alrededor de 80.000 kilómetros si consideramos la costa en su dibujo. Eso hace que evidentemente la vocación pesquera y acuícola de Chile tenga características muy particulares. Como bien señalaba, nos hemos consolidado dentro de las 10 potencias pesqueras del mundo y segundo productor de salmónidos, pero también estamos consolidados en el cultivo de moluscos. Hoy día en materia de mitílidos somos también el segundo productor y estamos avanzando decididamente en el cultivo justamente de algas. Son elementos que están caracterizando la actividad productiva de Chile, con un fuerte énfasis también en el desarrollo del mundo de la pesca artesanal. Chile tiene 103.000 pescadores artesanales registrados, alrededor de 20.000 embarcaciones, y toda la labor pesquera y acuícola que se desarrolla en el país se desarrolla al interior de nuestra zona económica exclusiva. Es decir, otra característica de nuestro país es que, como estamos bañados por la corriente de Humboldt, no requerimos salir más allá de las 200 millas para desarrollar nuestra actividad. Todo eso nos genera condiciones que yo creo que hacen que los productos chilenos tengan la valoración que tienen en el mercado internacional.
Thank you, Julio. So you were mentioning seaweed, obviously, as well, and I actually wanted to continue with Elena on seaweed. I would like to ask you if there are any initiatives that you would, in particular, obviously, want to mention to start with. And I have also seen that another time, on another product, we have Asia beating us in terms of production. Yeah. So basically, when we go to seaweed, they produce 98% of it.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what on earth is happening to us in the EU?
Well, first of all, on the initiatives, and because this is a special event for the FAO, I just would like to, I'm very pleased to announce that in the last UN General Assembly, it was launched the UN Global Seaweed Initiative, led by the Global Seaweed Coalition, with the support of FAO, the UNCTAD, Global Compact, UNIDO, UNESCO, IOC, and I'm sure I'm going to forget some others. But at this moment, with the support and signature of 3 United Nations members, Indonesia, Madagascar, and France. And this is a crucial initiative that has been being worked on for several, I would say, a few years, but was firstly announced in the UNOC in Nice last year, and now officially launched this year at the General Assembly. And it is very important because the seaweed sector is in fact very big, and as you say, mostly coming from Asia. It's, we are around 35 million tons, wet tons produced, according to the FAO reports, and the value of $1.2 billion of exports. So it is big, although sometimes we here in Europe, in our little world, sorry by the expression, we tend to think that it's a small and very recent thing. So, but in fact, although Asia is the main producer and seaweed is developing in so many countries, including Europe, we see that there are several bottlenecks. So the goal or the main objectives of this initiative is really to coordinate efforts to work on standardization of security standards, production and processing standards, to foster coordinated research to help in the development of the sector, and also very importantly, raising awareness, communicating beyond the borders of the seaweed stakeholders niche. It is just starting, and I like to launch everyone a challenge, and especially we have here members of the government of Spain, that Spain can also join this initiative and sign this initiative, because Spain has very critical and pioneer companies in the seaweed world. Some of them will be in Conchemar. I know HK Seaweed is here sitting somewhere, you've all heard of Portomões, Algamar, and these are the 3 of them that have been here for over 20 years and leading the process. So, and then, so this is just quick. Regarding the why are we so delayed? Well, first, seaweed aquaculture is very recent, it's very new. Modern seaweed aquaculture only started in the 60s, last century. So this means that we still have a lot to go. So, and although the farming of seaweed in Europe is not, in terms of tonnage, is not very relevant, the fact is that most of the companies that triggered the development of seaweed farming in countries like the Philippines and Indonesia or Tanzania were in fact European and other Western countries processing companies. So what we are seeing now is that what we want is to bring and to foster the development of different species, mainly for high-value markets like food, human health, cosmetics, plant production, and animal health also. So in fact, directly and indirectly affecting the food sector. And I think we have everything to do that. We have the knowledge, we have motivated people and companies, resilient companies. And now, in the recent years, we have what is more important, with political will at the EU level, and also investors are starting to step forward. So I think we are in a good moment, and now we just need to take the wave and make the wave flow, yeah.
And make sure, of course, that we kick it off as best as possible.
Yes.
As you were saying, political will, I mean, we know that is always really fundamental in whatever we want to push forward. And then, obviously, as we know, in this world, rarely anything happens without money. Yeah. So these investments, we're calling for investments literally in every single of these conferences that we do. So that's very important, please.
And just adding a small detail, as in Europe, we are a peaceful group of countries with more or less the same mindsets and mentalities, but we are still very fragmented. And I think that we really need to think the seaweed value chain as really an European effort instead of just country by country or region by region. Otherwise, we will never gain the scale that is necessary to face importations or other countries. Yeah.
Exactly. So we need to think basically about communication, and we always say you actually really have to make sure that you communicate strategically, and not so much even strategically anymore. We need to make sure we reach large audience, and we somehow always speak amongst ourselves.
Yes.
So let's see how that can evolve. So I'll come to Sebastian. So Sebastian is one of the very much AI, I would call, of the two speakers here. So Sebastian, you're based in Hamburg, and obviously we've named the company. I have to say I've had the pleasure to be in your company. So this really fantastic place with a lot of scientists walking in their white, because obviously the very controlled conditions in this, and I'm sure you'll speak about that, are very important. So I'm not exactly sure that very many people really know what this is, how it happens, and then how it actually looks. So could you say a little bit about that and maybe place yourself on the market also in terms of market access that I'm hoping you're planning in the future, because as I know, you're not on the shelves
Correct.
right now. I cannot buy you, right?
Yes. Yeah, first of all, thanks also to the organizers for having me and taking together with you a look into the future also of protein production, because I think cell-cultivated will be an additional part of the future protein production alongside the other technologies and conventional seafood as well as we know it today. But let me guide you a little bit through the process of what we understand of cultivated seafood or cell-based seafood. And in the essence, what we're doing is that we take out the cells out of the fish and produce it outside the animal body in so-called fermenters. So you can compare it to a brewing process where we instead of the yeast produce fish cells in large tanks, we feed them, and in the end we can harvest the protein from it and create different kind of products. And I think that's, as you mentioned, of course, and we're talking a very new technology compared to seaweed right now, where this technology has started kicking off, I would say, in the 2020s maybe. We're talking about a very young industry, and you mentioned people on R&D, and yes, still R&D takes a big chunk of it. It's a lot of development necessary to bring these new kind of products to the market. Where are we standing right now? So we co-founded Blue in 2020. The last 5 years we spent on optimizing the cells we have isolated, so creating cell lines that can continuously multiply and serving as a novel resource for our products, and also scaling them further. So the bioprocess itself is very critical. How can you scale efficiently cells to larger levels and produce tons of biomass in the end? And the crucial part is here that cells usually tend to stick to surfaces, because they know this from the tissue in the fish, and they need these cell-to-cell contacts and cell matrix contacts. And we managed to create a process where the cells stay happy, stay in this environment, have these contacts, and can grow in 3D, so in these tanks. And what we managed was to get them to 500 liters right now. That is already pretty large for us as an industry. Only very few companies so far have managed to do this. Nevertheless, we are just producing kilograms of cells, and we, as mentioned, would need to produce tons in the future. But that's the very exciting part right now, because the next challenges are really to continue this scaling path towards larger bioreactors, larger fermenters, towards scales of 10,000 liters each, producing in 200,000 liter factories in the future. But it also needs more. It needs regulation. We've seen only one approval so far in the US for another company there producing salmon, Pacific salmon, serving now in first selected Michelin restaurants. And we need to see more of these approvals. And of course, it's always about food safety aspects. We want safe foods, that's for sure. The processes itself are not efficient enough, I would say. So we need to be faster to get to the markets, because we only can convince consumers once they are able to get their hands on the products, right? So that's our goal, to get market access and then also manage expectations, because I think it's right now also clear our very young industry certainly has profited from a first wave of interest, also investors providing money to scale the companies. But now we also have to prove that this is viable for the larger markets. And that, from my perspective, needs stronger collaborations, collaborations between the countries, but also collaborations between us as startups and larger corporates and companies, mature companies, to really bring this to the consumers, because we can't do this all alone. And I believe what we with Blue have trying to do, at least for the German-speaking regions, is really creating awareness about the technology, also about the challenges that we still see ahead, but really providing also the benefits of the technology and providing also the viewpoint that this is a needed addition for the future, because we see the challenges in the other sectors, and this can be a way to provide proteins also for the future.
For the future. I think I'll try to connect actually now, Mihir, to you, as Sebastian mentioned volume, obviously, as well as needed cooperation, right, and collaboration. Why? Because, of course, there's a platform, right? So it's actually very interesting, Mihir, you're also in engineering, right, in terms also of education. But it's an interesting one that you're trying to do. So build a B2B engine to actually power or enable the industry. I understand a little bit like a one-stop shop, where a company like Sebastian's tomorrow can actually sort of come and make sure that they know where to start from. Then it made me a little bit think also the names that you gave to them. So the Cultivate OS, and then when I saw OS, I thought Steve Jobs, and then I was thinking, oopsie, that was rather a disruptor, right, of our time, in the positive denotation of that word, obviously. And then your platform is also called Alchemist. So quite cool names, I think, you've chosen there. So can you give us a perspective on what exactly you are and what you could do also for the companies that are sitting here today, so that they maybe could pick this up and include into their product?
I think there's a few challenges that we see in adoption of new technologies, and as Sebastian rightly said, we think this collaboration and engagement with the traditional producers and processors in the industry will be critical to achieving kind of mass scale distribution of these novel products. And we see the biggest challenge is predominantly making the technology accessible to the partners we want to work with. And when we talk about cell cultured or cultivated seafood, this is essentially bringing high-tech biomanufacturing, the likes of which is being used in cell therapy today and in biopharma today, and bringing it to food. And there's a few things we have to do to make that viable. The first is make it much more cost-effective than it is to make pharmaceuticals, because we don't pay anything close to pharmaceutical prices for our food. And the second is we have to do it at 100 or 1,000 times the scale. Both of those things mean we need large industrial operations, but it also means we need partners who can do this in many places. I think realistically, we can't talk about having one factory per continent or even one factory per country. Right? A normal food factory maybe produces 10,000 to 15,000 tons per year of a product, something in that range. So we produce hundreds of millions of tons of products out of the ocean today, something like 170, 180 million tons of seafood. So if we're talking about 15,000 tons per factory on the optimistic side, and 150 million tons of current production today, you can see we will need thousands of production facilities across the world. So for us, the big focus has been standardization of the technology so that it can then be replicated easily in many different places, and it can be localized. So we can develop technology that enables producers in Spain, in Portugal, in Germany, in the US, to make the fish consumers are already enjoying, aware of, wanting to consume, but bringing production to where the consumer is, rather than being constrained by where the fish naturally grows. One of the key levers that we think is emerging now is the use of AI for process optimization and industrial automation. And so we've seen this in certain high-tech industries. It's slowly making its way into the food manufacturing business. But in particular, when you talk about these highly controlled processes, this is actually a very good use case for AI to help human operators manage complex processes. Even if their background is traditional operations, traditional manufacturing, they don't need to necessarily be an industry expert in biomanufacturing if we can simplify what it takes to run the process. And part of the goal, the second part of that goal is to accelerate the cycle of going from one concept to product and market. There are certainly multiple steps. One of those steps is the regulation, which we have limited influence on, but we do have much more influence on the technical development cycle. And part of what we see is people eat dozens of species out of the ocean. Right now, cell-cultured seafood probably covers 5 of those species, if I'm being optimistic. And so I think there's a lot of work for us to do, even if these first products succeed, to bring the next 10 to 15 species to market and really capture a lot of what consumers would like to be eating. But then it can't be 10 years and $100 million or $500 million for every new product development. It needs to look much more like 1 to 2 years and maybe $1 million or $2 million, because that's in the realm of what food companies can invest for the future. And so that's where we see AI and the alchemist we've developed takes the learning from prior species, applies an understanding of the biology of fish to help us translate past experience into accelerating future development. And that I think builds trust and confidence in the industry that when one person has a factory running, that many more companies say we can come in and actually participate in this next generation of tech because we can see it working and we can understand how we could do it ourselves.
Perfect. And then, if I well remember, you actually also have kicked off a partnership with a pretty important company in Japan.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so we've actually started building this model. We've partnered with Maruha Nichiro, which is the world's largest seafood company by volume, depending on the year, but certainly top 2 to 3 annually. And their flagship species are things like pollock from the Alaskan fishery, bluefin tuna, and several others that they trade globally. And they're one of the companies that I think in the long-term view is recognizing they're facing shortages of supply in certain species and has already started to adopt things like salmon aquaculture, a recirculating aquaculture, to bring production of salmon into Asia so they're not having to air freight salmon fillets over from Norway every day. And so they're thinking, what's next? If we achieve this, if we bring salmon to Japan, that solves one near-term problem, but we have additional potential risks where we see that technology approaches like cell culture can help to firm up the supply chain and create more alternative production. And we have now additional partnerships we're building, one here in Europe with Nestle Purina and a handful of others, to bring these innovations into the segments where seafood exists, which is not just human foods, but then we also see the co-products and byproducts going into the pet food sector, into cosmetics and personal care. And if we are successful, if we're in an optimistic case, if we're very successful on the food side, we also need to think about these other parts of the value chain.
Ya está. Genial, gracias.
Yes. So I think we need to think about these other parts of the value chain because otherwise they will face shortages if we start successfully producing cell culture without thinking about places where the side streams are going right now.
Of course. So we're going to have to actually speak about the cooperation, the collaboration, sort of where one is maybe afraid of the other as it is something new that is coming on the market and why one should not be afraid of the other. I think that should be an important one. Guus, if I can come to you, so we're in Europe, obviously you're a representative of the processing companies and our trading companies. Can you give us a situation of the supply in Europe today? So what is it that we process? What is it that our consumers like? And would you say that in the view and in the business that we're running today in Europe, actually these companies would think about the new products?
Okay, thanks, Katarina. Maybe we have to look at the whole context. If you look at, I'm not going to go global because that's too complicated. Let's stick to Europe, that's already quite complicated. So if you look at the supply situation in Europe, the market is about 11 million tons of products each year going to the consumer with a 24 kilogram average consumption. And if you dig into it, and we just published our new APC EU seafood supply synopsis, which we do every year, and we analyze all these trends and we analyze the flows. And what you see is that the European wild catch is going down. It's about 3.5 million tons now a year. Aquaculture is more or less the same. It's at 1 million, 1.1 million. It's not taking off yet in Europe. And all the other products are global sourcing, so we have to find them all over the world, aquaculture and wild catch. So it's already a very tight situation. Now, if you look at what's happening around the world, geopolitical things going on, Russia out of the game, so we can see more pressure on the supply side coming at us, and it's already happening. And at the same time, of course, we see that other parts of the world are growing and are taking more consumption. So we all know that this pressure is going to grow further and further. At the same time, we're all trying to get the consumer to eat more seafood, aquatic food, because we say it's healthy, you know, it could be very sustainable. So it's something we want to promote. And just imagine that every consumer would eat 10% more fish a year. Then we would need 1 million tons of fish. Where is that going to come from?
Exactly.
So the whole supply situation is very tense. I believe the market could grow if there was more supply, and I'm definitely sure that the consumer is willing to take the seafood, even though the price may be high. I still think if you have what it was said this morning, if you have the right value for money, I think the consumer is willing. And salmon was mentioned. Well, salmon is not a cheap fish, but it sells. And why does it sell? Because it appeals to people. It's not difficult to prepare it. You have all sorts of variations. So it's about offering the right product to the consumer at the right time, and of course at the right price. So if you take all those things into account, and then you look at aquaculture, that has the potential to grow. We need the feed for the aquaculture. So that again means that we need resources to be able to grow the aquaculture. So I think from every angle you're looking at it, it's pretty sure that we need additional resources. And how these are going to look and how we can use them, that's an open question at the moment. But I think we are moving towards consumers that they don't buy a whole fish anymore. You know, that's a certain group. Most people just want products. And they want to have a product that's healthy and that's easy. And I think there are the possibilities where we can start looking at maybe a hybrid type of products, products where you try to optimize the resources that you have, and maybe sometimes switch a little bit in the composition of your product according to what's available and what's not available. I think we have to move away from the idea that every consumer is going to buy a whole fish and that they love to prepare it and it has to be local. We won't be able to do that. So there will be a segment and there will always be a market for the nice whole fresh fish, and I'll be one of them. But it's not going to be the average consumer. And I think looking at all these developments, than having novel foods or seaweed or other products, they can all be ingredients for products that we're developing for the consumer. And I think that's where we need to focus on. And that's probably also where the investment needs to go, to see how can you connect those and make sure that the consumer understands the product And you can see it happening in the meat now. If you take minced meat, many retailers are offering minced meat, which is 50% meat and 50% plant-based. So we're going to see more and more of these type of different products. And I think that's where we connect, because we produce the products, we process them. And I think there will be new technologies coming up to integrate these products and to be able to manage our resources better and be more efficient also with our resources, because that's another thing, yes, of course, that counts. Make optimal use of what you have.
Of course. No, very many important sort of topics also to touch on. But when you mentioned a point of collaboration, and I've seen Elena immediately sort of shaking her head in agreement. So Elena, can I sort of ask you, obviously it's already a mature market, as we were speaking, right? Seafood, the seaweed. How can it, and is it already doing what Hus said? So being an extra ingredient in the products that we're placing on the market.
So yeah, seaweed are I mean, if you look at plant-based products, vegan products, seaweed extracts are being used to bring taste, to bring texture, to be able to replace some animal ingredients on it, and also not only animal but also synthetic and artificial additives. So of course they can be used like that. Also in terms, I mean, they are already used as functional because of their texturizing components. They could be used even as media for growing cells, for cell culture. So seaweed is in fact a very versatile resource that can really tackle and be integrated in different things. There are more and more companies, normally traditional food companies that were only using land-based plants, for instance, and they are using seaweed to replace salt, for instance, in their products. So there's all these bottlenecks that can help to increase the integration of seaweed biomass. The problem of Europe today, and going into Europe, is that we don't have enough seaweed biomass to supply that. So seaweed in Europe has been mostly wild harvested, and it's not sustainable to be able to tackle all this demand. So aquaculture will really need to develop. And before I was mentioning the politic will, and I just want to go back to that because there's the EU algae initiative. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but it's really to foster the development of seaweed aquaculture. But also very importantly, I think, in looking at the whole of the aquaculture, to translate to a national level the will of the EU. Because when we say that we need to increase resource production, we face constraints. We face space constraints, we face regulations. Some of the farms cannot be placed, and some of them very good cannot be placed in marine protected areas, so others are facing problems with tourism and boating. So there needs to be maritime special planning that can include this need of increasing aquaculture in Europe, because I think that's one of the reasons why aquaculture hasn't picked up today. Yeah, so going to that, that's mostly, I think, mostly it. There are many things, and if we look at and just comparing cell culture, which we are talking high biotech, more and more automation and reduced people, in fact. We also need to look at the liability of coastal communities, and in fact we cannot be one or the other. We need to complement all of us, because we need to keep giving jobs for fisheries and aquaculture-based communities, and this is something that seaweed farming can help with. So it needs always to be a collaborative effort between everyone, I think, here. Yeah.
Julio, can I come to you, particularly because Elena was mentioning, again, obviously the political will and a regulatory landscape that obviously wants to potentialize and incentivize the production, but obviously needs to make sure that that production is sustainable. And we mentioned in Europe, and who's also mentioned the same, the aquaculture, even if there are incentives, particularly from the European Commission and I believe all our member states, we're actually stagnating. We're not growing as expected. But you're the second, again, in terms of aquaculture producer of salmon. Political will and acceptance, regulatory landscape, and the fact that you are producing a lot. What are you doing maybe differently? First of all, how do you hear what Elena said? Is it a problem? And why are you better than us in terms of production in aquaculture?
Yo tengo una mirada muy optimista de lo que se puede llegar a hacer combinando todas las dimensiones de producción que existen, la pesca, la acuicultura, incluso el cultivo de células. Quiero ejemplificar con nuestro caso que Chile tiene el 44% de su territorio marítimo, de su zona económica exclusiva, como área protegida. Casi la mitad de nuestro océano es área protegida, y aún así somos la 10ª potencia pesquera del mundo, y aún así somos el segundo productor de salmónido. Entonces, creemos que es posible combinar ambas dimensiones. De hecho, para nosotros el cultivo de algas hoy día es una actividad que estamos incentivando, a pesar de que probablemente las praderas de algas más importantes, praderas naturales, están en la costa del extremo sur de Chile. Entonces, existe un espacio para el desarrollo tanto de la actividad pesquera, de la actividad acuícola, porque existen consumidores que quieren productos de manera distinta. Hay consumidores que efectivamente siguen deseando el pescado entero en su mesa y ojalá saber quién lo pescó y en qué lugar y tener una trazabilidad completa del producto. Hay otros consumidores que quieren una vida más simple y quieren el trozo porcionado producido por la acuicultura o qué sé yo, y hay otros consumidores que no se van a preguntar sobre el origen del producto, sino que sobre su practicidad. Tengo la impresión que los diferentes países, de acuerdo a sus modelos productivos, van a ir adaptándose a el tipo de producción que más les conviene. En el caso de Chile, hay un amplio espacio para el crecimiento de la acuicultura. Nosotros creemos que efectivamente es una actividad que en los próximos decenios puede triplicarse la producción en el caso de Chile. Y en el caso de la actividad pesquera, la verdad es que Chile se maneja con comités científicos y comités de manejo y procuramos mantener una producción que sea permanentemente sostenible. Sin embargo, quiero destacar que la principal pesquería de Chile, que es el jurel, ha tenido una recuperación y muy importante en los últimos años. De hecho, la Europa Pacífico Sur acaba de calificarla como una pesquería que está en plena explotación y dejó de ser una pesquería sobreexplotada como estuvo por décadas.
Thank you. Elena, I see that you...
Yes, muy rápido, very fast. I think one of the good points of differentiation for Europe and for the different things we are talking about here, and it's common to the fish and to the seaweed, is species diversification. We've heard that in the previous panel. We are only tackling a little list of resources available. We need to expand beyond that, and that can be a way of differentiate Europe, for instance, from other resources that are being important. And that opens more avenues for development, and it brings new products, and it brings better profitability also for the companies that are investing in these new activities.
Thank you also for the positive approach, and thank you also for the word optimism and being an optimist. It's so important, I think, because we keep speaking about how everything is bad, how everything is terrible, how everything is overfished, how we're not sustainable at all, etc. So we so many times, or actually 99% of the times, forget to actually mention what is positive, and there's quite some positive things. There's a question for you,
yes.
Sebastian. So I'll read it for the translation. ¿Cómo piensan abordar la denominación de estos productos para informar adecuadamente al consumidor sobre este tipo de productos, diferenciándolos de la acuicultura y pesca extractiva.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question and also relates to what Hus mentioned earlier. I think in terms of what this technology can provide, we're talking about an ingredient. Yeah? So what we are producing is fish protein. And I think the benefit of it is that this is a real deal. So our analysis had shown that we have exactly the same amino acid profile, for example, as compared to the fish we're targeting. And we're targeting first salmonids such as trout and Atlantic salmon. I think what is key also in talking about collaboration again is really creating this consumer acceptance. A lot more communication is needed and continuous communication, because we ourselves also find very often that we are like in our own bubble, in this like biotech, food tech bubble, but we need to come out and get out and educate people about these novel technologies. And as you mentioned, yeah, keep the optimism and see what's positive about it. See that, hey, yeah, we're on the same page because we want to promote seafood as a very positive food for the future because it has health benefits. And the same is true for this technology here, where we have the purest protein that we can create. We have a highly controlled production process, knowing everything that goes in, and that might also be seafood components as feed, and knowing exactly what comes out, the fish protein itself, that then can be used for the products in the end, be it, as you mentioned, a mixture of plant-based and animal proteins, which might be needed as transformative measure. Because, and that's the point I want to make, we're talking about a food transformation that needs time. It needs time also for the consumers to get educated, to get used to this new technologies and new offers. Again, I think it's positive because it offers also a broader diversity of products that we can create also in the future. But we also need to manage the expectations right, because you mentioned, yeah, where in Europe produce we 1 tons more, and what's the timeline that's needed? Yeah? And I think that embraces all stakeholders here to come together also for Europe, because my point here also, seeing from a technology perspective, from a technology provider in the end, Europe says they want to be a leader in this category, and let us also again then collaborate intensively to not like let it on the western side or on the eastern side do the other regions first and then come next. So this is a unique chance, I believe, for Europe to take the lead, because as you also mentioned, we have knowledge, we have great people here in this region working on these topics, and also like this collaboration between the industry, which is fantastic in Europe, and this new technology providers is key from my perspective.
No, of course.
Can I add something to that? Because I understand this question, because this question is also related to the discussion we're having about plant-based products.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you know that for fishery we have very extensive regulations with the names, even in the legislation. Yeah. Everything is defined. Yeah. And then, of course, I think there are 2 dimensions. The one dimension is the level playing field, because you don't want somebody taking your name and sort of pretending that it's tuna, but it's not tuna. Yeah. So that's something that the consumer, I think, should know and should be well informed. And the other thing is, I think, indeed the image, because if you're trying to sell something to a consumer which is not what it is as he thinks, he probably won't buy it again.
Yes.
So I think that it's very important that these regulations are, that we start thinking about it, how we want to do it, because we have a lot of problems now with the plant-based products, and the names that are used and the way the consumer is being informed sometimes is not correct. Mm-hmm. And from the seafood side, we say that this shouldn't be, because it's not the way it should be. So I think it's really important that we start thinking about this well in advance and not when it's already on the market and then the problems start and then we get all these things after us. So to me, it's something that we need to pick up. And being optimistic, it's very simple. Go to the fair tomorrow, see all these companies, see what they're doing, and you'll be an optimist because you can see what's happening in this business.
The thing is, we only have 4 minutes, and there's still too many questions. But I think the regulatory bit is really very important, and I know there's issues. Of course, you said there's only one license, I believe, in the United States, was it that you mentioned earlier? So, I mean, we do have we do have our legislators, I believe, also in the room. So, and I mean, the fact that so many things are very slow is obviously really pulling us back. We know EFSA takes quite some time also to approve things. And we often say, I mean, our companies are already there. They are in this vanguard. It's just something else that is lagging behind, even if we are also, I mean, if you speak to the Commission, if you speak to all the legislators, these people are working day and night. So this is also a very, how do you say that, very smart and wanting to get somewhere people. And then we have all the political stuff that slow everything down in this world. But voila, I had a question on the screen a minute ago.
But maybe Katharina, I can jump in just because you mentioned EFSA, and I think it's very important also to mention that also on the authority side, I think it's not against EFSA, it's with the EFSA, because we are all interested in safe foods, and I think we have the best and strongest regulation in the world, and that's where Europe also can be proud of, I believe. My point is rather on like, how do we regulate it in this more efficient way? Because from my perspective, it needs kind of a food champion on novel technologies, understanding exactly the technology, the product made out of it. I think labeling is definitely a very important thing. It's also where I believe, like, why can't we call it cell-based made, and consumers can decide if they want to try it. But it's also about the process itself, that with EFSA it takes at least 24 months before a product can reach the market, and you need to deliver all the data up front, risking that if one or the other data points are not the right ones, you risk to get a stop by the EFSA, which delays the process by 6 months. And knowing, working in a startup where you usually have like 12 to 24 months of financial security, that is a huge burden. And that is something I would love to see, that we can work together on it, how we improve these timelines.
No, of course. Excuse me.
No, I was saying that needs to be the main roles of sector associations. That's why you need to have groups of people focusing and trying to solve these bottlenecks, either be European or global. Because, for instance, I mean, very quick, in Europe we have a small list of seaweed species that are authorized for using as an ingredient or consumption, but you go to Japan and they eat 400 species. The genera in Latin is the same, but here they're forbidden and they're not. So this is something that the Global Seaweed Initiative is trying to harmonize, because it doesn't make sense in a way, right, those things.
I wanted to touch on another regulatory thing, but I don't want this question to disappear, because I think it's actually also important, so let's keep in our mind, and this is for you two guys, the price. Because obviously that is going to be important, and there is ethical questions as well. But I did want to mention very quickly that you guys were mentioning you should do tasting, right? Also, the consumers should actually be able to taste these products, and before you can push them on the market, I understand they cannot be tasted. So there is also some of these things that maybe our regulators should know. There is a little bit of, so what comes first, right? The egg or the hen? And the thing is, they should actually come together, obviously in some sort of, is it controlled way?
Well, I think we can look at markets that are trying things in the novel foods with introducing sandbox-type approaches, where the regulators and the companies can work closely together to learn what a good approach would be. I think often the challenge is you're asking regulators 10 years ago to forecast the future and to write a framework that will always work for all novel foods. And that's a big ask, and you never get everything right the first time. But I think having these accelerated learning cycles with these developmental approaches is important. And for example, the lack of being able to do tastings makes it quite challenging because you don't even know if you're going to go on a 2-year journey with the regulator. Am I even putting the right product in front of the regulator? Or will I learn as soon as I get approval, the product's not quite right? The consumer doesn't like it, I need to change it. Now I'm in a 2-year additional development cycle just to get regulatory adaptation for that product. So I think there are some of these things that are just practical challenges. Even if on its face you say it's a 2-year regulatory period, it may not be. It could be much longer if you end up getting market feedback, if you need to improve your process to bring price down. There's lack of clarity right now. If I improve my product production process, it's 90% the same, but I've replaced some ingredients with a food grade or feed grade alternative to make it a cheaper production process. It's all still meeting the safety criteria in my original approval, but now I may require a new approval. And I think that ambiguity is very difficult to manage because, as Sebastian said, in startups, we think in 2-week cycles and 4-week cycles, and 2-year cycles that become much more difficult to innovate in.
Of course. So I'm hoping everybody's hearing and who needs to hear as well. Can we comment the price and the oops daisy? We're -1. So voila, we've gone over over our schedule. So maybe if we can just quickly comment on the price, because
So for example, with umami, we're working on high-end species, things like eel, bluefin tuna, and sturgeon for caviar. These products, actually from our pilot production facility in Singapore, we can already produce at price parity with their conventional equivalents. Now, they're obviously high-value products. So the question is maybe how long until you hit price parity with something like salmon. We think that's 4 to 5 years from now. And it requires then getting to a scale because you can't do that with 1 ton of product. But in our view, if you get to 50 tons of product, you start to achieve interesting economics that are much closer to traditional conventional products.
That sounds like a very good thing. So we have to wrap up. So can I just wrap up with the fact, with a very optimistic fact, right? So we know when we get new innovations, right, at the very beginning we think nothing's going to be of it, but we also know that something always becomes of it. So let's maybe try and be quick, hopefully, in the way that we do things. We always say these things, but they then, in the end, always go the way they do. So optimistically, our traditional sectors, what we would call them traditional, are optimizing. So we're getting more and more sustainable, and then we have something very cool on the market, as Sebastian was saying, also very cool people. So we need to make sure that in Europe we harvest this potential as much as possible, because the thing is we're not doing it. People go to the States if they actually really want to start up, and apparently they go to Singapore, they don't stay here. So let's maybe make sure that they do. Thank you.